is also online with us, and it's 11:40. I think we'll start. I request all of you to kindly put your microphones on mute, please. We begin the program in another couple of minutes, and learner speaker will address us. So please stay on mute till the whole program. Only when the question answer session starts, I request you at that point of time, you can please kindly unmute and ask your question. Sanjay, if you can kindly mute all the participants except our learner speaker and me. I'll do it.
I have done it. I have muted all.
Yeah, I've done it. I've muted all. Yes, I muted all. Yes, okay. I've done that. Okay, we'll begin the program then. Learner speaker for the morning, Dr. Rakesh Gupta ji, respected past presidents, distinguished personalities amongst this august gathering, dear friends, ladies, gentlemen, Hari Om, Radhesham, Jai Julilal to all, one and all. A very good morning to one and all present on this virtual platform on this nice and wet Sunday morning. So it's not so wet though, but still it's the monsoon period. On behalf of the Sindhi Chamber of Commerce and on my own behalf, it gives me immense pleasure and happiness in welcoming you all to this morning's program. As much as we desired to have this program in person, but due to the prevailing situation, we were constrained to hold it in virtual format. Hopefully the world will return to its normalcy soon and we shall be able to meet in person. Well, as is the custom, we begin the program by invoking the blessings of the Almighty. I request Mrs. Geeta Nichani. Geeta, are you online, Geeta?
Yeah.
Yeah. So kindly render the invocation, please.
Yeah. Is my voice audible?
Yeah, we can hear you, please.
Okay. Sabninche Jai Julelal. Gaye Ganapati Jagat Vandana Gaye Ganapati Jagat Vandana Shankara Sumana Bhavani ke Nandana Shankara Sumana Bhavani ke Nandana Gaye Ganapati Jagat Vandana Siddhi Sadana Gajavadana Vinayaka Kripa Sindhu Sundara Sarva Dayaka Siddhi Sadana Gajavadana Vinayaka Kripa Sindhu Sundara Sarvadayaka Gaye Ganapati Jagat Vandana Modaka Priya Muda Mangaladata Vidyavari Sabhuti Vidata Modaka Priya Muda Mangaladata Vidyavari Sabhuti Vidata Mangata Tulasi Dasa Karajore Batahi Ramasiya Manasa More Mangata Tulasi Dasa Karajore Batahi Ramasiya Manasa More Gaye Ganapati Jagat Vandana Gaye Ganapati Jagat Vandana Gaye Ganapati Jagat Vandana.
Thank you, Geeta, for that soulful rendition.
Thank you.
Friends, the prime objective of the Sindhi Chamber of Commerce is to keep our members updated with the latest laws and also new business developments and fiscal opportunities in this dynamic world. In this direction, our chamber regularly organizes seminars to keep our members abreast about the same. Today's interactive topic is on a very important subject, namely income tax search and seizures. Albert Einstein, one of the greatest geniuses of all time, once said the hardest thing in the world to understand is income tax. The Indian Income Tax Act 1961, enacted 60 years back, after many changes towards simplification, is still one of the most complicated laws of our country. Even more complicated are the provisions relating to search and seizure. The very words search and seizure under the income tax send shivers down the spine for most of us. Power of search and seizure is an extreme power in the hands of the state. Search and seizure is a serious invasion on the rights of the subjects. In India, the provisions relating to search and seizure were introduced for the first time in the year 1956 in the Indian Income Tax Act 1922. When the Income Tax Act 1961 was enacted, the provisions of search and seizure were incorporated under Chapter 13C of the Act in Section 132. And this section is often referred to as a code within a code. Over the years, the section has seen numerous amendments to keep update with the present times. To quote our speaker, Dr. Rakesh Gupta ji, from his latest book on search and seizure, I quote, "The law relating to income tax search and seizure is cumbersome, and at the same time, the process of search and seizure is painful from the point of view of the taxpayers," unquote. Dr. Gupta has very rightfully pointed out that it is indeed a very painful experience to go through an income tax search. The tax rate leviable on the taxpayer on his undisclosed income is the regular tax rate for the relevant assessment year. However, since 2016, the law has been amended, and most of the time, the officers today are invoking the draconian provisions of Section 115 BBE and seeking to tax the undisclosed income at a whopping 78%. Over and above this, the assessee is required to pay a penalty at a minimum of 30%, depending on which assessment year the income is sought to be disclosed. Thus, a search person is fastened with a tax liability of more than 108%, apart from the interest leviable on such taxes. Further to add to the misery, the assessment procedures have also undergone sweeping changes with a new complicated concept, namely represented by an asset, being introduced. Friends, this morning's talk is to comprehend this complicated subject in a very simple and lucid manner. And to help us in understanding the same, we have with us a very learned personality from Delhi, Dr. C.A. Rakesh Gupta ji, who has taken time out of his extremely busy schedule and has consented to address all of us on today's topic. Sir, I extend you a very warm welcome and thank you for accepting our invite to address us this morning, sir. Our enthusiastic, encouraging, and young at heart president is eagerly awaiting to formally welcome you all to this morning's program. I request our president, Mr. Harish Ashrani, to kindly welcome all the participants, please. Harish. You're on mute, Harish. You're on mute. Yeah. Yeah, Harish, go on.
Good morning, and Rajesh Khan, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just giving you a scenario. It's about 6:37 in the morning, and the doorbell of the house rings. Ting tong. When you open the door, some people are awake, some people are half asleep. Open the door, there are about 5 or 6 people standing outside your door, and the leader of the group puts his hand in the pocket and takes out a card and says, "I'm from the income tax department. I've got a warrant to search you." What goes on in your mind at that time? What happens? You are confused. You don't know what is happening. Your reaction, you don't know how to react at that time. Being searched by the income tax department can be a very confusing and challenging experience. A lot of us often people are aware of the do's and don'ts in such a situation. They don't know what to do at that time, how to react. So, it is my pleasure today to welcome Dr. Rakesh Gupta, who is an ex-member of the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal and a very prominent advocate for the last 35 years, and also practices in the Supreme Court of India. He is an expert in his field and is here with us today to share his experience and knowledge on the matter of income tax searches and help us in understanding and clarify the myths and truths and any doubts and clear all our apprehensions regarding the same in an interactive section with the question and answer session that will be take place after the talk. And whatever doubts that you may be having, you can please ask our expert today. And sir, with this, I'm extending a very, very warm welcome to you and everybody else present here on behalf of the office bearers and the managing committee members of the Sydney Chamber of Commerce. Welcome, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Harish. I now request the Vice President, Mr. Suresh Kukreja, to kindly introduce our learned speaker, Dr. Gupta ji, please. Suresh?
Yeah. Yes, Ashish. Am I audible?
Yeah, audible, yes.
Okay. Good morning, one and all. On behalf of the Sindhi Chamber of Commerce, let me take the opportunity to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Rakesh Gupta. Dr. Rakesh Gupta graduated from St. John's College, Agra in the year 1980 and secured first rank in the university. He is an ex-member of the Income Tax Appellant Tribunal, having working experience of nearly 35 years. He was appointed as an accountant manager of Income Tax Appellant Tribunal, ITAT, in the year 2000, but resigned to resume his legal practice as an advocate representing income tax cases before all fora of judicial hierarchy, that is ITAT, the high courts of the country, and the Honorable Supreme Court of India. He is an eloquent speaker and has addressed more than 500 seminars and workshops on legal and practical topics relating to income tax, and has co-authored a detailed commentary on law relating to search and seizure, and another book on taxation of real estate developer and joint development arrangements with accounting aspects, published by Taxman. He has been contributing to his profession through articles in professional journals, newspapers, and through appearances at various news channels. He is also a practicing advocate appearing in the Income Tax Appellant Tribunal, High Courts, and the Supreme Court of India. He has also argued in high-profile cases of the country at the Tribunal and High Court, drawing a wide media coverage. He has participated in the United Nations Committee of Experts on International Cooperation in Tax Matters, held at UN headquarters in New York in 2017 and 2019, as well as at the regional headquarters in Geneva in 2018. He is a member of the International Association of Tax Judges and participated in its meetings held at Helsinki, Finland in 2017 and Cambridge, UK in September 2019. Mr. Gupta, we thank you for taking out your valuable time and joining us on this webinar.
Thank you, Suresh. Well, such achievements cannot be put down on a small piece of paper. This is just a small gist what we're giving you. So I've had the occasion to interact with Dr. Gupta ji a couple of times, and I have seen many webinars with him as a speaker. I must add that he is an admirable speaker, a repository of knowledge, and apart from all the qualifications and accolades that our learned speaker has earned, for all this, he defines humbleness. He is an extremely humble human being. Dr. Gupta ji also has a penchant for singing and poetry, I'm going to understand. At the end of the program, I would request him to kindly recite a few of his poems for us. Sirji, I personally thank you for accepting my request to address us today. Now we are all eagerly awaiting to hear you, sir. Over to you kindly. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you to each one of you and for the kind words spoken for me. I mean, to many of which I may not truly deserve. But then by speaking such nice words, you have raised the bar. And let me see whether I come up to that level of expectations. So a very wet good morning. In Delhi, it is raining since last 3-4 days. But then weather, I mean, it's not like that of Bangalore. Anyway, so I have been told by Ashish ji that today's audience comprises of chartered accountants and large number non-technical, non-professional persons. So in such a gathering, I mean, then the dilemma is that I cannot be too technical. But today I have decided that I'll speak very practical things, because I have been told that the large part of the audience is the family members of those who are into the business. And therefore, I had decided to speak as to how the search is conducted, what prerequisites or requirements are there before the search action, and then what are our rights. I mean, what does or what are the usual questions which are asked, and what are, I mean, different kind of fact situations which have arisen in the past. Ashish ji has told that search is a very traumatic experience. I myself have undergone, and this kind of a very unpleasant experience. Initially, I used to practice as chartered accountant. One day, one client came and said, kindly keep your kindly keep your this thing. Yes, please. That everybody makes you auditor, we'll make you director. So he made me the director in that company. Company was searched, so was I. So I became wiser, I mean, since that day. And I and my partner, Dr. Raj Agrawal, then we decided, we were searched in 1996, that we will document our this unpleasant experience in the form of a book. It took 15 years, I mean, for us to get that book. So friends, first of all, let us understand that the search is conducted after undergoing and adhering certain processes. It is not as if any departmental authority feels like searching, then he searches. No, it's not like this. There are certain prerequisites which have to be done, and that has to be done at the level of very high-ranking officials. And when those officials or that officer is satisfied, which is of sufficient higher rank, then he issues the warrant of search. So let us not remain under this kind of any dilemma or impression that the searches can be conducted or planned by the tax department at their sweet will. Because the search, as Ashish ji has said, is a serious invasion on the fundamental rights of a citizen. Therefore, when such kind of actions are called in questions before the courts also like them to be satisfied by the departmental authorities as to whether those kind of processes have been completed with or not. So broadly, without going into the technicality, one satisfaction note is prepared, and the satisfaction note is to the effect that this person may be in possession of any money, bullion, jewelry, valuable article or thing, which has either not been disclosed or would not be disclosed, and it represents the concealed income on which the taxes have not been paid or would not be paid. Now, in that situation, this is one of the situations. There are a couple of more situations that if notice is served to produce certain books of accounts or documents, and those documents or books of account would not be produced, or if someone has been asked, the date of compliance is gone and these have not been produced. So when the satisfaction note is prepared based upon the factual things which I have just mentioned, then it is put up before the officer of a sufficient higher rank, which is normally the principal director, which is the joint secretary at the Government of India level, principal director of income tax. And it can be even higher authority, and in certain situations it can be even the additional director, but then generally the warrant is taken from the principal director of income tax, now who satisfies himself based upon the material or information brought before him that these prerequisites or either of them exists, and only then he may consider in terms of issuing the warrant of search. And that warrant is given to for execution is given to officers, mostly to the deputy commissioner of income tax or the DDI, deputy director of investigation, and that is how the process of search begins. But once the search begins, now it is a very confidential exercise, And surprise is very important element because if the surprise element is taken away, then the very efficacy of the search action uh, may be affected very badly. So different teams covering various locations where the search has to take place are constituted. They are given the maps. Rather, the maps are also at times not given in a straight jacket manner. Now, envelope within the envelope kind of situations are handed over to various search teams, and they are directed that they have to open the outer envelope at some location. And when that envelope is opened at that location, then another direction is there that they have to go into which direction. And that is how the various search teams now tend to strike all locations simultaneously, so that the information that the search has begun at one location, may not reach to the other locations, and so that the surprise element may not be taken away. So this is how the search teams are constituted, and then they strike. And even at the time of striking at various locations, the authorized officer himself goes alone, leaving his entire team behind. Because if the all team members go and the person peeps it from inside, then he may not open the door. So even element of surprise is, kept in mind even at that stage. Now the doors are opened, the warrant is shown to the person that I am the authorized officer. I have come to search you under the provisions of the Income Tax Act. I have got the warrant of authorizations. Kindly see the address of this premises and the name of the person in whose name the warrant of search is. And now you put your signature, having or in token of having seen and read the contents of this warrant. That person whom it is shown and whose signatures are taken, now he acts like a zombie, because when the entire search team comes, then I can tell you even my experience that even I do not remember, and that portion of my memory has gone. And now I can claim, and I could have claimed even at that time, that I knew something about this search. And then when a person of my, whatever little is standing, could have felt at that stage what to say of a common man. So the signatures are taken, signatures are obtained, copy of warrant is not given. Copy of warrant is taken, though there is nothing confidential in that warrant, but then there is a law that the copy of the warrant is not given. It is just shown, and the signature of the person who has seen and read it is taken. Thereafter, the preliminary statement is recorded. Now, what is the preliminary statement? Or should I first of all tell you the process, and then I'll come to the inside things or the various terminologies which I'll use. So preliminary statement is recorded. Thereafter, the witnesses are called from the neighbors, and then the search action begins. And cash is counted. If there are jewelry, that is weighed, or in the presence of the valuation, registered valuation officer, registered valuation officers are called. Inventories are prepared. Then computers, hard disks are cloned. Mobile data, now that is also susceptible to be cloned. Whatever documents, bank statements or bank passbooks which are found, the inventories are prepared. Since they are the bank statements, most of the times they are declared, so they are not taken away, they are left at that stage only. But then the inventory is prepared, in which bank account, and then simultaneously the statement based upon the recovery which is made now is taken from the persons from whose custody and control these books of accounts or the documents or the assets have been found. Then of course the inventories of all documents which are found is made. Then the decision to seize cash and jewelry or any other unaccounted assets which are found is taken. Seizure memo is made. Then the locker keys may be found, which are put in restraint. If there are bank accounts which are found, they are also put under restraint. If there are certain, voluminous documents which are found which cannot be seen in a day, then they are also put into Almira and the restraint order is passed. And then later on, the restraint is lifted. Similarly, lockers are opened. Again, this process of recording preliminary statement kind of a thing, and then a statement is taken with reference to the contents of those lockers. And then thereafter, the search is closed. And the search can go on for 60 days. I mean, that is the outer limit. But the administrative direction is that it should be concluded as early as possible. So this is the broad way as to how the search is conducted, and first initiated, then conducted, then concluded. Now, what is the preliminary statement? Because these are very important things which, I mean, one should know. Preliminary statement is a statement which is taken before the beginning of the search. And the objective of recording that kind of a statement is that preliminary informations are asked from the person, and such details and informations are given by that person on oath. And the objective is that if later on something else is found which is at variance with what has been stated in the preliminary statement, then the burden should be very heavy on the shoulders of this person. Say, for example, now it may be asked as to how much cash is available in your house. Now, if that person says that it is about 10 lakhs of rupees, and if later on, I mean, the cash which is found now is substantially more or lesser than what has been stated, then of course, the burden to prove that the actual recovery which has been made at later stage, why that is at variance with what has been stated by you in your preliminary statement. So the objective of preliminary statement is to bind you so that later on one cannot find easier ways to wriggle out from what he has stated earlier. So the questions which normally are about that in which companies are you directors, in which firms are you partners, in which LLP are you members, then where are your godowns, now whether how much is the jewelry, how much, and the jewelry belongs to whom, how much is the cash available, now whether this cash and jewelry belong to you or belongs to somebody else. I mean, so that whatever you stated at that time and later on, then you cannot take a chance to explain it that no, this jewelry which was found eventually belonged to somebody else. So it can be proved with the help of evidences even later on, but then your preliminary statement, now that would play a very important thing. Then how many children, where are they studying, who is meeting their cost of education, have you performed any ceremonies in few years period, how many vehicles do you have, and whether the stocks, I mean, which are available in your godown or at your business premises, now whether these stocks include some stocks regarding which the bills have not been yet received, or you have received the bills but then the materials are yet to come. I mean, the objective is, or what are the assets, or if it is at the residence, the valuables which are found, now what is, they belong to whom, and what are the source of acquisitions of those valuables. Then this is the so objective of preliminary statement is to record your statement on oath so that you may feel bound in case the things found during the course of search or otherwise are at variance with what we have stated earlier, because in that situation the burden to explain that variance would be very heavy on your shoulders. I'm not saying that what you have stated in the preliminary statement, I mean, will have to be taken for all times to come as if that was the only truth. No, I'm not saying, but then that is the most contemporary statement, and therefore anything which is said in a contemporaneous manner Now there may be a presumption that what has been stated at the spur of the moment, then that is bound to be correct. And in case that is not correct and something else is said to be correct, then you must explain. And not only must you explain, but then you must also establish later on, with the help of the direct documentary circumstantial evidence, that the later discovery was the state, was the fact, not the earlier statement. So burden is very heavy on you. Now in preliminary statement, it is asked, okay, do you have lockers? In which bank do you have lockers? Many times I have seen that the persons, though maybe having lockers, but then at that stage, I mean, they may tend to state lie, though it should not be done, because any statement which is factually incorrect or it is a lie, an oath now is an offense which is liable to be, and the deponent is liable to be prosecuted for perjury. And I have seen in my real life situations where the persons have said that they do not have any locker, the locker keys were found, and then there was a problem. So preliminary statement now is recorded by the authorized officer. The authorized officer is that officer usually of the rank of the DDI, the Deputy Director Investigation, who is given warrant to search by the principal director, mostly, not necessarily, but then by the higher competent authority, I would use that term, and based upon or on the strength of which the Deputy Director or the authorized officer conducts search. So once warrant is given to the authorized officer, then of course the first right they have got to make entry. As I said, that that ingress which is made into the premises, that is the first right. The second right the authorized officer gets is to break open the lock of any door, receptacle, almirah, where he has reason to suspect that books of accounts or the documents of the money, bullion, jewelry may be kept, and but then the keys are not available. It's not that the authorized officer, for the sake of deriving any kind of the sadistic pleasure, will break open the lock. It's not like this. When the keys are not made available, and he has reason to suspect that the things which he is looking for may be kept hidden in that locked almirah, etc., only then that can be broken. Then the next power which he has got, that he can record the statement of any person who is inside the house, or who is entering into the house, or who is going out of the house, and of course with respect to anything which has got bearing on the income tax proceeding. Then he has got right to compel a person who was responsible for maintaining books of account, or if those books of account have been maintained on electronically kept system, to cough out any password if there is one, and to make or to afford the necessary facilities for the inspection of those books of accounts of the document. Then he has got power, as I said, he has got power to put certain things in restraint in case, as I said, bank accounts or certain other documents or the jewelries which cannot be weighed, then they are put under restraint. And the restraint is that you will not deal with such restrained things in any manner except with the prior approval of, that authorized officer. And in case the seal is broken or otherwise dealing is made with respect to those restrained articles, then it is considered as a criminal offense, again, which is liable to be prosecuted. Then he has got power to record statement of the persons, and that statement may not strictly be in respect of the things found only, but it can be in respect of any other matter which has got any bearing in respect of the determination of income, or which has got any connection with the proceeding of the Income Tax Act. And then he has got power to prepare inventory, the inventorization of the stocks, because that comes in valuables. He has got power to appoint punches, as I said. Punches are appointed at the threshold at the beginning of the search, and then thereafter to effect a seizure of excess cash or the excess jewelry, on which we'll come later. So these are the powers broadly of the authorized officer. He has got power to do cloning of your computer data and your mobile data. I remember in the early days, I mean, when I was searched, I can say that my entire computer was taken away. But then instructions have been issued to the field officers that they should not take away the computers themselves. They should clone the data so that the working of the person searched may not be hampered, I mean, prejudicially. So now we'll come to the seizure aspect. As I said, that he has got power to seize the unaccounted cash. Now, what is unaccounted cash? Obviously, as the name suggests, that cash, the source of which is not explained. So if you are maintaining books of account, the cash, I mean, which is coming into the books of account, and those books of account have been regularly maintained, and that will constitute a strong primary evidence that this much of cash which is being shown in books of account is explained. So to that extent that he can't seize, he should not seize, but then any cash which is found in excess of that, now that you'll have to explain as to what is the source, because your books of account may not be complete. Your books of account may not be complete as on the date of search. So even you can explain with reference to other contemporaneous data or document or evidence that this cash is not unexplained, but then this is explained. I remember in my case, because I was searched on 14th of August 1996. I mean, that date I can never forget. I can afford to forget the date of my marriage, but then that is the date, I mean, which is etched in my memory. Maybe not a very, I mean, pleasant memory, but then so 14th August 1996, I remember, I mean, cash amount was found at my residence. Now in the preliminary statement, when it was asked from me, I forgot, I did not tell about that cash which was with me. But then when the search took place and that cash was found, and then I remembered that one of my clients came to me asking me to deposit the self-assessment tax, and then he left that money with me. And now the question or the decision was to be taken by the authorized officer. Now, whether this explanation, which at that point of time, I mean, I could not have supported it, but then they asked me the name of the client. I gave the name of the client, telephone number, and then the telephone was made. And when the client confirmed, yes, he has given this much of cash, and then that was not seized, that was treated as accounted for. So unaccounted cash is liable to be seized. I mean, that much we must bear in mind. So if there is any cash which is found and which is not explained with reference to direct documentary or circumstantial evidence, that is liable to be seized, and that decision will have to be taken by the authorized officer having regard to the facts, circumstances, the evidences which are available at that point of time, including the statements made by that person, and then the decision is taken. Then comes about the jewelry. Now, jewelry is something, I mean, of course, I mean, which is very dear to everybody, and including and particularly, I mean, to our women folk. So when the jewelry is found, so the ascertainment is made now whether this jewelry is explained or unexplained. Now, jewelry which has been declared in the wealth tax return which you used to file, or there are some other evidences of their acquisition which we can prove that it has been acquired out of the disclosed source, and then to that extent the jewelry will be treated as explained. The rest of the jewelry may be treated as unexplained. But then if somebody has not filed the wealth tax return and is not in positions to show at that point of time the source of acquisition of the jewelry, then the board has given instructions to the field officers that 500 grams per married lady, 250 grams per unmarried or female child, and 100 grams whether married or unmarried male members. Now this much of jewelry now will not be seized. So the board's instructions are that this much of jewelry, if it cannot otherwise be proved with the help of any other evidence to have been acquired out of the disclosed source, would not be seized. But then the courts later on have said that when it cannot be seized, it is on this premise that this much of jewelry now should be treated as explained, in the sense that this much of jewelry is usually available in any Indian family made up of gifts on various ceremonial occasions from the other family members. So in case no evidence is available in respect of the jewelry, then this much of jewelry, which I said 500 grams per married lady, 250 grams per unmarried lady, and 100 grams per male member of the family, this much of jewelry will not be seized. Now, I remember that this much of jewelry was not seized in one of the search which I had an occasion to handle. Now later on, it was found that this jewelry was studded with the stones, diamonds, and to the extent of the value referable to the diamonds and the stones, these were treated as unexplained. So I remember I had an occasion to argue the matter before the tribunal. In that case, I said, sir, this much of jewelry, when you say now, will be deemed to have been acquired on ceremonial occasions. Now, I mean, that means that jewelry, inclusive of whatever is, whether it has got some diamond or ruby or, I mean, whatever is there. So 500 grams per married lady. Now, if it is studded with some stones, now I'll accept during the course of the ceremony, at the time of birth of my children or at the time of the marriage, I will not say that you please exclude these studded diamonds or studded stones. So, 500 grams, yes. So 500 grams now. So, but then that is a matter of litigations. 500 grams, whether should be, I mean, grams of the gold, or it should be inclusive or exclusive of its attachment. So that is a matter of litigation. But then the board has advised its field officers not to seize, I mean, jewelry of this much of weight in case of search. Now, when the jewelry is being weighed, of course, it is weighed by calling the registered valuer. Now, couple of things which have to be borne in mind. Now, is that the quantity of jewelry and the quality of jewelry. Now that is recorded, and particularly when that jewelry is going to be seized. Now is very important, because anything which is recorded in respect of this jewelry, which will ultimately be seized. Sorry, I'm sorry. The quantity and quality of the jewelry which will not be seized and which will be left back at your disposal, the recording of the quantity and quality of that jewelry is very essential to be recorded correctly, because now anything which is taken away by them as a seizure, and even if the quantity or quality of that seized asset has come to be recorded incorrectly by the authorized officer or by the registered valuer, now that can always be demonstrated by saying that the quantity and the quality of the jewelry which has been so seized and which is in your possessions right from the day one till this stage, now you again get it verified. But then anything which is left back at your disposal, its quantity and quality must be recorded correctly, because anything which is recorded at this time for this kind of a jewelry, now that nobody would be in a position to alter. And similar is the situation in case of stocks. When the stocks are measured, weight, or I mean, whatever is done to the stocks, those stocks cannot be seized. But then the inventory which is prepared, whether before your eyes or before your responsible officer's eyes, now it must be ensured, because this cannot be seized. Therefore, the quantity and quality of that stock now should come to be recorded correctly, because anything which is not so recorded correctly, that may keep on haunting you forever, for all times to come, because contemporaneous evidence recorded at that time, at the time of taking inventory, that too in your presence or in the presence of somebody responsible in your office, now that is bound to be taken as correct. I remember in one case, survey took place. It was not a case of a search. So in survey, I mean, cash could not have been removed. So cash had to be left back. In search, of course, the unaccounted cash can be seized. Now, it was a case of survey, and on the facts, it was like the actual facts were like this, that there was some stocks which were found. So that survey officer wanted that stock to be declared. But this SSE's son, who was present at that time, he said, sir, this will have implications at that time under the sales tax in case my stocks found. So you kindly tally the stocks, and whatever is the difference, I will declare in the cash. But then the cash was not there. So a fake inventory was prepared of the cash, that how many of the currency notes of 500, and at that time 2000 was not there, 1000, and inventory was prepared. But then actually, I mean, that inventory of cash was not there. It was an arrangement or understanding, but of course that understanding cannot be on paper. Later on, that SSE said, sir, this much of cash was not there. Now when the SSE came himself, then he lodged his protest, not the survey was over, before the higher authorities of the tax department, and said, sir, there was not this much of cash available which has been recorded, and kindly get it checked from your other staff members who were there on the survey. I remember the chief commissioner, I mean, called the other persons who were involved in the survey, and everybody said, sir, this cash was not there. But then I tell you, despite the survey officials admitting in person or privately that this much of cash was not there, but then the cash inventory was prepared showing that these many are the notes of 500 denominations or 1000 denominations. Nobody could have tempered, and nobody could have done anything with respect to that inventory. So I want to emphasize by saying it that in respect of cash, in respect of jewelry, or in respect of any other valuable including stocks which are left back at your disposal and which is not seized, now the recording of correct quantity and the quality is very important, because if there are certain stocks which are not of worth, which are not moving, which are dead, now if it comes to be recorded as a good stock at the time of recording of that inventory or preparing inventory, now later on you keep on harping upon, but nobody would going to listen. I remember in one of the cases of a paint supplier. Now, if you remember, there used to be one Snosam. Snosam was made of some cement kind of a thing, Snosam. Now, there was huge number of bags of Snosam, but then because of that wet conditions, I mean, those Snosam had become bad. I mean, that was not carrying any actual market except the scrap value. But then when it came to be recording of the stock, I mean, that survey party recorded that these many bags of Snosam, and per bag was this much, and multiplied by this number of bags, and the value was. But later on, that SSE kept on saying, sir, that majority of that Snosam bags, I mean, were of these kind of that they could not be sold in the open market. But then there was, because then you can't prove it when the stocks have been left back at your disposal. You cannot prove, I mean, what was the condition. Yes, had your staff been vigilant and made it a point to make mention in the inventory which was under preparation at that time that this is unsaleable stock because of this reason, then that would have kept, because that evidence then would have been treated as a contemporaneous evidence. So this needs to be this needs to be taken care of. This is very important. I remember in yet another case, I had an occasion to even argue at the level of the High Court. I tell you, what happened. I mean, whether are you aware or not, we have got a very cramped market in Chandni Chowk. There are Katra Mahajani, Kucha Mahajani, and Chavdi Bazaar here in Delhi. Now there was a godown, and in that godown, it was found by the survey team that these many bags are stored, and that godown's measurement was also there. But then it was recorded by the survey team that this much of stock was found, these many bags were found. And SSE brought it on record that this go down is of this measurement, length, width, and height. And the length, width, and height of each bag is this. These many bags which have been shown to have been stored in that go down cannot be or could not have been stored in that go down. So it was an impossibility. And since it was an impossibility on the face of it, and therefore the stock taking was not done correctly by the survey team, and therefore to rely upon this kind of stock inventory at the time of assessment, cannot be said to be justified. I remember we lost it till the stage of the tribunal. And based upon this theory, that contemporaneously it has been recorded that how many bags were there, were found, your signatures are there. I remembered my Lord Justice Sikri as he then was. I said, I demonstrated it before my Lord. So my Lord, kindly see. Now I am saying, yes, that evidence is against me on the face of it, but then I'm at the same time showing a no less weighty argument or evidence that if physically it was not possible to store even these many bags, and then to say that these many bags were found, somebody will have to apply judiciously. I remember the matter was sent back by the Delhi High Court. To take into account this consistent pleading on fact. So it is a matter of fact that how much is the stock, but then there are certain very interesting situations do arise. I do remember, it was a case of a company which was in manufacturing with steel ingots, or they were manufacturing steels. Now, when the inventory was taken of the stocks, it was taken in a very, because you cannot weigh the entire stocks which is running into hundreds of tons so quickly, and that survey proceeding was closed in 1.5 days. And the way that inventory was prepared, that these many, I do not remember in what denomination it was there, but then it was in very round figures. So we raised these questions with respect to the preparation of the inventory, that how can it be said, even by having a sheer look at this inventory, that how can it be said to be correct that this much of stocks as claimed by the survey officials to be available as if it has been weighed, and that too, all things were found in this round manner, and it's not possible. So, but then all said and done, these are very highly fact specific things which I have just discussed on the later part of this point. But then we have to remember that quantity and quality of jewelry, quantity and quality of stocks, quantity and quality of other valuables which are found and which are not seized, now they must come to be recorded very properly. Otherwise, this incorrect recording will keep on haunting and chasing you, for all times to come, and with no virtual success at the end of the tunnel. Now, statements are taken, though statements at times can be retracted, to which I'll come little later. But then these statements are taken during the course of search, and these statements are recorded on oath, and they carry strong evidentiary value. That is what the mandate of law is also like this. But certain interesting situations I have seen emerging from these statements. Now, and more particularly about the children. The children means the grown-up children, and particularly the lady members. Now, they are working partners, they are working directors, deriving remunerations on account of their working from the firm or from the company. But when the statements are taken and the questions are asked, I have seen that these persons behaving as if they do not know anything. And thereby putting or posing a very important questions as to the very allowability of those remunerations in the hands of those persons, or in the hands of the firms, LLPs, or the companies, I mean, where these remunerations have been claimed as the deductions against the business profit. So I often say that it is good to earn, but then if not more, it is equally, I mean, important to know that what do I do? How much is my income? And what jobs I am doing? I must know, instead of, I mean, drawing a point blank at the time when the statement is being recorded. I mean, so I think I have been able to convey what I want to convey. It's very important, not only to earn, but then to know, I mean, how do I earn? It's very important. Now, many times I've seen that when my statement is being recorded, and even if I'm not supposed to know about certain things about my family members' working affairs, still, suppose if, I mean, my brother has purchased a property, maybe the joint property, I mean, or in the family property, I and my brothers, maybe the partners or the shareholders in company. So my brother may have entered into the deal on behalf of the firm or the company. But then, since I was not a party to the deal, in the sense, ostensibly, I was not a party, I did not execute the document. But then, if something is asked from me, and if I venture, I mean, into the arena which was not handled by me based upon some hearsay, again, I think that I'm able to convey what I am saying. So, because I am supposed to know what I'm supposed to, I know only that much which I'm supposed to. Now, if I try to tread into the path, I mean, which is not my route, or that dealing to which I was not a party ostensibly, maybe as a partner, I mean, I am responsible for all acts and deeds which have been done by my other partner, maybe my brother. But then I do not know what has transpired between him and the vendor or the customer. And then to give a reply in response to the question asked from me by the authorized officer, I mean, may do no good to either of us. Therefore, I should know the extent I am supposed to know. And because the statement which you make now, first of all, will constitute a very strong evidence against you. And then it can lead Pandora's box. It can lead to many unwarranted inquiries and investigations. I mean, why? Therefore, this principle that let us not speak about others' affairs. Affairs, I mean, the working affairs, or not otherwise other kind of affairs I'm talking. Yes, statement is not a test of memory. I mean, that must be borne by me. That must be borne in mind by all of us. That if I am put on a statement, kindly permit me to have water, please. It is not a test of memory. So if I want to give reply based upon my memory, then I may falter, and my faltering, I may prove to be very costly, and ultimately, I mean, may go into the directions which is totally undesirable, not called for. So I always say that in order to give reply, if you have to consult some record, books of account, your passbook, your bank statement, you are entitled. You say it, sir, I do not remember. I'll have to consult my files. I'll have to consult the books of account. But of course, you cannot be heard saying that you have to consult with a chartered accountant or with the lawyers, because I mean, these are the investigative processes. The assistance of chartered accountants, lawyers are not available at this point of time. So, statement is not a test of memory, and therefore, if an authorized officer compels you to remember, that he can't do. But then if he says that kindly remember, I mean, that you cannot prevent him, from saying so. But what I mean to say is that if I do not remember a particular thing, then I do not remember. I cannot be forced to remember. But then if I say that though I remember, but then I won't give you reply. I have seen such kind of challenges being thrown by certain recalcitrant friend to taxpayers. But then, I mean, that is not in accordance with law. Because if I do not remember, then I do not remember. Because if I do not remember, then nobody can peep into my brain and then find out. Then though I remembered, and yet I chose to say that I do not remember. So if I do not remember, then it is not. Then I do not remember. But then statement is not a test of memory. That much I must know. I should know. Yes. Now many times I have seen the things which are asked are something which are already there in the books of account. Now for such kind of things, one need not tax one's memory. And therefore, if something is part of books of account, if something which is duly accounted for in the books of account, something which is a matter of record, tend to say that this is a matter of record, it is duly accounted, it is coming into the books of account, now that would suffice. Now if authorized officer asks you to remember, but then your omnibus reply in such situations, because as I said, the half-baked replies, half-cooked replies, or some incomplete replies, may create a lot of problem. Therefore, if some transactions are matter of record, some transactions are appearing in your books of account, and therefore they are part of books of account, then to say that they are part of books of account, they are matter of record, they are duly accounted for, that is enough, more than enough. Because to get into the niceties or the nuances of those transactions, may do no good to any one of you. Of course, it may do good to the other party, but then, therefore, these three things are very important. If there are duly accounted for, part of books of account, matter of record, then your explanation is there. Then you cannot be heard, or then you cannot, and then nobody can be heard saying, oh, you did not give reply. You gave reply. Many times I have seen during the course of search, particularly when statements of various family members are taken at different places, different points of time, I have seen to one family member it would be told that the other family member has admitted this. What you have to say. Unless you see it with your own eyes, don't believe. Because it may be a ploy. It may be a tactic. Because it has not been reduced in writing by the person who is asking this, that your such and such member of your family has accepted it. Therefore, you'll have to understand that whether this kind of an oral statement made by somebody who is putting question to you is whether a fact or whether is a ploy. And therefore, you must not take any such kind of words at its face value. It may be an attempt against you, and therefore, one who is vigilant enough to take care of one's interest, would see that he's not put into the trap. Now, I have seen many times when the questions are put, they are put in a volley-like manner. Several questions at one go. and then when you give reply, and then whatever you give reply, I mean, then that is recorded, the manner in which that person who is asking that question, I mean, chooses to write. No, I remember when the questions are asked, you may request, because that person who is asking the question is acting like a court. Court is supposed to be fair, judicious, objective, and therefore you can say, sir, you kindly ask your question one by one, because I may not be that intelligent. I may not be as articulate as you may be, and therefore you kindly ask your question and let that question be written. Let me have some time to understand and grasp it, and then whatever reply I give, kindly record. It is very essential for you to ensure that the questions which are asked are written so that you understand them precisely, because when the volley of questions are fired on you, then that is enough to confuse even a person of any standing or caliber. And then when you choose to give reply to those volleys of questions, and then this person who is writing your answers, now if he chooses to write answers according to his convenience, now that may be very dangerous. So you may request the person recording the statement, kindly ask the question, kindly do write them, let me read them, let me understand. It is not any race against time, because your questions and my answers may go a long way in fastening the tax liability on me. Now you who are asking the questions now would go somewhere else after a couple of years, may not in recent, I mean, very recently, but then you may go, but then this kind of question and answer and these proceedings will keep on haunting me, I mean, for a very long period. Therefore they affect me individually, directly, inextricably, in a proximate manner, and therefore let me grasp, understand, and whatever is my reply, you kindly record it verbatim, because any change in your reply here and there, I mean, may bring sea change of difference. He works very hard and he works hardly. Now there is a lot of difference between the two expressions. So that copious or verbatim recording of what we have said is very essential. I have seen many times the persons who are asking questions may not be acting fairly. There may well be the possibility that the person who is asking questions from you also may not be acting fairly. So this is very important thing which has to be taken care of. Now the search team or the authorized officer for that matter, they don't have any power to arrest. They don't have any power to administer any threat or intimidate, because they are public officers doing their public duty. They are supposed to be fair, judicious, conscientious, objective, reasonable, and these kind of powers are not there. But then if authorized officer says that in case you do not reply it correctly, then you may be liable to be penalized under the provision of law, I mean, that is not a threat, that is making you aware of the consequence. But then otherwise, to intimidate or to administer any threat is not permissible. They have got no power of arrest under the income tax. Therefore, I mean, one should not be pressurized by such fear of threats or coercion or arrest. So that is very important to make our cool and compassion. These witnesses are very powerful, are very important. So since this entire search action is undertaken in front of, before the eyes of the punches or witnesses. Therefore, if you find that the fairness or objectivity is being compromised at some stage, then you can bring it to the notice of the witnesses. You can even write the letter then and there to that officer, a copy to punches, witnesses. And I tell you, if fairness is being compromised or objectivity is lost by the officers, and you bring it on record, then I don't think there is any officer, who can afford to be, dealt with in such a manner. In fact, what happens that most of the times, the SSEs now are under such kind of a pressure that they probably do not find any occasion to think in these terms. Otherwise, I remember in one of the cases, this authorized officer brought one evidence from outside. Now you see, such kind of instances are also not uncommon. Though search team, when they enter into the premises, they offer themselves that let the SSE should search them. But then who has got the audacity? Who has got the cheeks at that time to search? Those persons who have come to search him in turn. So some evidence was not found from the premises of the SSE. It was brought from outside and was sought to be made as a part of the Panchanama of the SSE. I remember that SSE protested before the punches, and he ensured that his disobjection, that this evidence has been brought from outside, now that was recorded, that came on record. And I tell you, based upon that evidence, when huge additions were made, which when were challenged, now this piece of contemporaneous evidence that SSE did protest, and this evidence was not found from there. Now this kind of thing was coming contemporaneously, and that was taken into account by the appellate authorities, and not CIT appeal, but then by the appellate tribunal, in order to find out the substance in this allegation of the SSE that this evidence was not found then and there, it was brought from outside. And the moment it was brought from outside, now that evidence loses its the entire validity. So the power of the punches, the witnesses. Now if some threat is being administered, now you can invoke the power. You can say to the punches, he punches before your eyes, you have seen that this officer has said this. Now it's not permissible. Kindly ensure that this comes to be recorded, or I am giving it to you in writing. Kindly receipt. Kindly acknowledge my this letter. Because I tell you, the truth has got a very strong force behind it. And if it is a truth, and I believe that it will be truth, if some intimidation or the threat is administered and then you bring it on record, then it will have its own, it will have its way, because the truth is by the side what you have said. So the power of the punches, you must not hesitate, one must not hesitate in invoking them, because they are punches to the proceedings, and whatever they observe, now it must be brought on record. Now I have seen that records which are maintained by a person, after all, that constitutes evidence. And during the course of such evidences which are found, there is a presumption that the contents of these documents which have been found are correct. Therefore, if any details of household expenses are kept, and when these details are kept, they are kept very meticulously. I have seen some SSEs maintaining the details of expenses incurred on the marriage functions very meticulously. And when these evidences now become part of the search material or the seized records, then obviously, what to say of presumptions, those evidences or those documents speak very loud and clear. So records maintained are very dangerous. And I can say that these records which are found are incriminating material. There are presumptions available against you. They constitute a very strong piece of evidence against you. And therefore, I mean, they can be used by the tax officers, tax department later on to fasten the tax liability. I mean, this much I would now want to say. I want to bring it on record. Now, one thing which I have observed, suppose if there are 6 or 8 rooms in the house, and those rooms are occupied by different family members. Now, cash is found from different rooms. Jewelries are also found from different rooms. Now, what I have seen, that authorized officers, after collecting these cash and jewelry, they mingle them up. And then they prepare one inventory only. No. It must always be insisted, sir. If cash has been found from room number 1, room number 2, and room number 3, kindly mention how much is cash found from room number 1, how much from room number 2, how much, because, or for that matter, even the jewelry. Because when it has been my experience that when the place of seizure or place of finding that asset is recorded precisely, then the explanation now which will be there with respect to that cash or the jewelry or any other valuable, now that will be much more what should I say, weighty. But then if the entire cash found from all the 7 or 8 rooms are clubbed together, and then to explain it may not be that easy. Similarly, the jewelry, because from whose possession and control, let us understand this very important principle of law, that whose possession and control something is found, the burden is on him to prove that what is the source of it. But once it has been clubbed together, and after clubbing, then its magnitude also becomes quite substantial. And then to seek explanation, to find explanation, or the explanation as to its source may not be that easy. Therefore, must be ensured that cash or jewelry or any other valuable found from different locations, their discovery of location or the location of discovery must be precisely mentioned in the seizure memo or the Panchanama, so that at later stage its explanation becomes easier for one, I mean, from whose possession and control this has been found. So this is very important facet or aspect which I thought that I must share. Yes, if a person under search now wants to rest or take a periodical rest, now he is entitled. And in case if that is not allowed, then again invoke punches and ask that officer, sir, kindly write, because you are acting as a court. You have to be fair. There is no personal interest of yours. So kindly write, I am not well, I am feeling this. And of course, when you are saying that you are feeling like this, then it must be a fact. So I am asking you to record the fact. If I am not feeling comfortable, I remember in one of the case, and that person was not very literate. He was a goldsmith. I mean, I live in Faridabad, very near. There is a place in Haryana, Palwal. So that goldsmith, now at every question's answers he kept on saying, and then he ensured that it is written. Sir, I am not well. With your coming, my blood pressure has shot up. I mean, he said in Hindi, and initial resistance was shown by the authorized officer. But then he persisted, sir, unless you record the facts under which I am undergoing, I am undergoing the mental trauma by your sheer presence. And because of this, my blood pressure has shot. Kindly do write my state of health. And at the beginning of every answer, he kept on insisting, and he kept on ensuring that what he insisted now comes to be recorded. And in case I remember now, since it has happened with me. Now there were, because usually one authorized officer comes along with his other teammates. So that authorized officer, I mean, went somewhere, the other one came, then he started asking. I said, sir, I'll answer, but then you kindly mention that it is you now who has asked this question. Since I knew the position that, I mean, to substitute one authorized officer from this kind of a person, maybe from his team, I mean, it can bring the entire statement at nullity and can show, I mean, the kind of intimidation or indirect intimidation has been brought to bear upon. So he said, no, sir, then, I mean, the boss would come and then he'll ask. So in case I want to take a rest, and I remember I said, sir, and I want to take a rest. Initially, I have given the answers. I want to take a rest for 2 hours, and then kindly do not disturb. And I remember then thereafter, when they resumed, I said, sir, kindly put this fact that I did rest, and then now is this time, kindly record. So recording of time now is very important, because that will show that how long, I mean, the statement has been dragged. And when a person in controlled conditions of this genre now is asked the volley of questions after questions, and then his psyche, his mindset now can very well be appreciated, I mean, at later stage, at least by the appellate authorities, not by the investigative authority. So this, now in case of jewelry, in case if you are not satisfied with the valuation or with the inventory prepared by the registered valuer, then you have got right even to make a request, maybe a written request, to the authorized officer as to your dissatisfaction, bringing the reasons of dissatisfaction, and then making a request to appoint another registered valuer. So at least maybe second registered valuer may not be called by the authorized officer, but then your objection, that too in a contemporaneous manner, must come on record, and which will be appreciated when that valuation report will be taken into account by the quasi-judicial or appellate authorities later on. They will take into account the objections raised by you at that spur of time. Then, as I said in the beginning, that regarding the existence of locker, we should not remain under any kind of a misconception that the existence of locker, I mean, can be wished away or cannot be discovered by them. So never ever attempt, because first of all, the keys will be found. Even if the keys are not found, some kind of investigation or recce, I mean, must have been done by them. I remember in one case, the identity or the existence of the locker was concealed, but the department was proactive, and mostly the lockers are at the nearby places of where one resides. So they kept on tracking the movement of the SSE, and then they found the SSE now attempting to open a locker in a bank. They allowed that SSE to enter his desire to open the locker in that register, I mean, on which the signature is taken by the bank. And then the departmental authorities came. And I tell you, based upon that, the prosecution was launched. And that person is undergoing the prosecution even today. So prosecution ultimately may not be successful, but then the process of prosecution is very traumatic, very painful, time consuming, of course, energy eating. So one should not make a statement which is false, because false statement made on oath is liable to be visited with criminal consequences. Now, cash is found, or for that matter, any valuable is found and which is seized. Now, there is a mechanism provided under the Act itself which requires that person from whose possession and custody something has been seized to come forward, explain the nature and source of acquisition of that asset to the assessing officer along with the evidence. But then there is a time limit for it. Within 30 days from the end of the month in which the seizure has taken place. Your search may be on or your search may have been concluded. But the month in which that seizure has taken place, within 30 days, you must make a petition to the assessing officer explaining the nature and source of acquisition of that cash, jewelry, or any other valuable asset. And then that assessing officer, after being satisfied about the nature and source, even if it has been seized, many times it so happens that the SSE may not be in a position to produce evidence at that point of time. But then there must be evidence which has to be procured from somewhere else, from somebody else. Then if it is brought on record within 30 days from the end of the month in which the seizure has taken place by moving a petition to the assessing officer, then that assessing officer, being satisfied and after obtaining the prior approval from the commissioner, principal commissioner, then can release it. Though I'm yet to see any release made by the tax department in response to such petitions. But what I wish to emphasize at this stage is that moving petition in time, now that is of essence, because in case it is not so released, then you have got a remedy by way of knocking at the door of the High Court. Okay, my lords, kindly see, I have moved petition in time explaining the nature and source, and yet either the action is not taken or the decision not to release, I mean, is not in accordance with facts and law. So moving the petition in time is very essential. Now cash seized. Now cash was found, explanation was sought from you, and it was not to the satisfaction, and therefore the authorized officer seized it. Now this seized cash cannot be adjusted towards an advance tax liability, though it's unfortunate. Now cash is seized, it will not earn any interest even to the government because it will be kept in the public deposit account with some State Bank of India by the government. And on the other hand, now it could have been utilized by me by paying advance tax, but then the law says now it cannot be adjusted towards an advance tax liability. A specific prohibition is given. But definitely it can be used as your towards your self-assessment tax liability. When you file your return, show this cash which was seized, that it should be applied towards your self-assessment tax liability. Make a claim in your return of it. So at least from that date on which you make a claim that it should be adjusted as self-assessment tax in your return of income, your tax liability or the interest liability should stop at that stage. So these are the places where I have seen that we do tend to falter, and therefore I thought that I must make it a point. Now Ashish ji made a reference to section 115 BBE of the Income Tax Act, now which says that if there is some asset found, the source of which was not explained, now would suffer the tax at the rate of 78%. 60% tax, 15% surcharge, 3% higher education cess. 78% tax. Now you remember, I remember, now till 1973, I used to be told, because at that time I was in school, that the tax rate used to be as high as 97%. I used to wonder that who would earn. Later on, it was sought to be moderated till 70%, but even 70% tax, I mean, was quite demotivating tax rate. Then it was brought to 30%, and more or less it remained 30%. Now, in case of companies, now it has been brought down further, 22% and 15% in certain situations. But now, again, to go back to 78% in certain situations is very atrocious. It's confiscatory. It is expropriatory. But then we'll have to live with it. 78%. So, in order to avoid this kind of the tax rate being foisted and fastened on you, though the choice is limited, but then kindly see that you declare income, not the asset. So if you declare income, and after earning that income, if you can show that you have acquired this asset, then that income will suffer the tax, whatever tax rate is there, say average 30%, let me take. But then if you declare asset, but in certain situations, I mean, the asset is found, there is no source of income, I mean, which can be ascribed to the acquisition of that asset, then obviously in that situation, the asset only will be disclosed. But then, if there are, suppose, sales which are discovered, which have not been accounted for in the books, then obviously any income with reference to those undeclared sales will be forming part of your income from business. And this income from business would stand taxed at 30%. Now, out of this income, now if you can show that the stocks was acquired, then assessing officer, even if he wants to apply 78% in respect to the stock, now that will not be acceptable to the appellate authority at least, because income and then application of that income into asset. So this distinction, I mean, though, I mean, my professional friends, I mean, would appreciate it, but I would urge even my other non-professional friends also, that when it comes to the declaration between the income and the asset, then kindly see that to the extent possible, if income is declared, because income will be assessed under a particular head of income, whether that head of income may be salary or income from house property or income from business, income under that capital gain or income from other sources. But then if you declare some amount during the course of search or even otherwise in respect of the assets, then that addition would be made under certain sections of the Income Tax Act, and that is called unexplained investment. And unexplained investment is the kind of income which is to suffer tax, and there is 78%. So when there is a choice that there is some source of income or some income which has been found, now which can be declared under these 5 heads of income which I just narrated, then declare and then ask for the application of that income into the acquisition of the other asset. There cannot be, I mean, 2 kinds of additions separately, because first you earn income, then this asset was acquired, then you can ask for the telescoping that income into the acquisition of that asset. And then in that situation, then you may end up in paying tax at the rate of 30%. I remember when the stocks are found in excess, then what is being shown in the books of account? The departmental authorities say that we will treat it as unexplained investment. I say, sir, you have undertaken the search, you have undertaken the survey. These are the extreme arms of investigation. Now, during the course of your investigation, you did not find that I do anything else other than the business which I do. And therefore, any income out of which this asset or the closing stock has come to be built is only out of the income from this business. And therefore, this income which I have earned from this business now is culminated or is being reflected in the stocks. And therefore, this stock now is not an unexplained investment, or maybe it may be unexplained, but then it is explained to be out from my business income. So this distinction, I mean, is very important that you, when it comes to making declaration of income, either during assessment or during survey or during such, then you must make declaration towards the earning of income, not into the asset. But so long, but then you must be in a position to then telescope this income into that asset. Many times the cash and in case of a jeweler particularly, is stocks may be kept at home. So if that stock is found in the shop, then that is a stock, and a stock cannot be seized. But then if that jewelry is found at home, then the departmental authorities contest the very claim of the jeweler that it is part of the stocks. They say no, it has been found at home, therefore it cannot be taken to be stocks. Whereas the fact of the matter may be that the jeweler, because of the security reasons, must have brought or may have brought that stocks from his shop to his residence. So if this is the situation, then kindly ensure to make it as a part of the statement, even if it may be seized, but then your statement that this is part of your business stocks, I mean, that must come on record, even if it is undeclared. Let us assume, even if it is undeclared, but then if it is jewelry made and which is meant for sale, nonetheless, it is the stocks and it should not be seized. But then the fact that it is the stock, that this must come on record. I've seen certain persons, they say that I would record the transactions in coded form. But then let us be very clear that the coding may be decoded also. Because I have seen that decoding material also is supplied by that person now who keeps the things in coded form. Now I remember in one case that SSC was keeping the cash transactions in the coded form, and that coding was that to put decimal or to keep the record of these transactions as if they have been entered into 15 years or 20 years back. But then some transactions, out of those transactions were the transactions, I mean, which were routed through the bank. Now the very fact that the bank transactions were also mingled with them, and that shows that bank transactions, of course, I mean, they cannot relate back to those 20 years. So by keeping such transactions together, the decoding formula itself has been handed over by that person. So though the things may be kept in the coded form, but then the decoding formula, I mean, may be available. The department may decode the things, and that has to be borne in mind. So in case there are joint premises, now there is one premises in which several companies do operate, then kindly do ensure that if there is a clear-cut demarcation of the premises. Otherwise, if from one premises several companies are operating, and then there is a problem, because if action on one company takes place, then the things which are found in respect of other companies, now that have got its own consequences. So there may be one large office of 2 or 3 or more companies, but then there must be clear-cut demarcation, so that if there is an action on one company or one person, I mean, all may not be roped. So that has to be employees, I mean, at times make a weak link. They have to be made aware of all these things which I just discussed, and the rights, the obligations, the implications of their actions, inactions, lack, negligence, omissions, commissions. Now that has to be, I mean, briefed to them so that they should not fall, or they should not be trapped, or, I mean, of course, depending upon the facts, but then they should also be aware of their rights and obligations, the powers and the duties of the departmental authorities. I mean, so that they can be effective, efficacious, and efficient. I mean, while discharging their employment obligations for and on your behalf in case of such kind of action. I think now it is 1:20, and it would be better, Ashish ji, if there are questions. Today, I have confined myself only to the hardcore practical aspects only. I have not spoken on law at all. I have not spoken,
Yes, sir.
and I do not know whether I have come up to your expectations or not.
No,
but
certainly much beyond that, sir. Thank you.
So thank you. So if there are questions, I think it will be better in case I take
Yes,
a
sir. Thank you for a lucid and wonderful, simple presentation of the whole subject. It's a complicated subject present in such a nice and lucid manner. I'm sure our members have some questions to ask. Yeah, you can put them in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Ashish, can I go?
Yeah, please, sure, start, please.
Sir, so many times the women's names are included in the office partnerships, and various things are declared, and we are not aware of those. So under these circumstances, can we be pressurized into, acknowledging these things?
I think, Sangeeta ji, you were there when I discussed this aspect, to say that it is better to earn income, but it is the best even to know, I mean, the source of that income, our roles. So when you say that we women are made, I mean, I would say that women are made because the women willingly, I mean, become to be so made. And when they are willing to be so made, so I can expect that they should also know that what do they do. I mean, what functions out of the total functions are they, and then thereafter, I mean, they can, I mean, they can give reply. But then if
No, but
somebody,
in old family businesses, like since we are not earning members, the names are used as tax, whatever.
so then
So we
there
are
are,
not really
yes.
into it, no?
So Sangeeta ji, then there are implications and complications, because I mean, one must pay tax on the income which one earns. Then this is somebody else's income which is sought to be fragmented, divided, and I mean, it's being used as a subterfuge to reduce the incidence of tax. So I would say that even if, I mean, I also hail and come from an old family, but then we must make, I mean, each one of earning members of family aware of all these things. But then if it is not, then of course there are implications.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Ashish,
Uncle, please go ahead.
Ashish,
Uncle.
Chimalal here. So you have got a family ancestor jewelry somebody is holding. Can he hold apart from that 500 grams more? What I am asking you.
Yes, you can, but then burden is on you. Because when any exemption, deduction, relief, rebate now is claimed. Now here I am claiming a relief of something which is more than 500 grams. Therefore, the burden is on me. If I am able to prove that these were acquired by my ancestors, and here is the evidence of that, then it is all right. In case you are not, then it will be deemed to have been acquired in the year of search.
How do we account that way? Suppose can we account as ancestor jewelry, which is we have not paid money, then what have we acquired?
Suppose if your ancestors have got it valued, say in the year 2000, and there is a registered valuer's report evidencing the existence of these jewelries even in 2000, then that may constitute one piece of evidence. So I always say that if it is a fact, you will find, I mean, several evidences, I mean, which can prove or which can say it in your favor. So
some cases, ancestor jewelry is around 40, 50 years old, where people, I don't think have any
So
memory.
I think I have given you enough clue.
Uncle, I think we'll discuss this offline. What sir has said is, if you have evidences to prove that they are old and ancestral, that should suffice.
Okay, okay.
Anybody else? Any question? Dr. Saab, yes, please go ahead.
Sir, thank you very much for very good, interesting lecture. I feel 2-3 sessions more we require. Congratulations. Correct person has come for all of us. And my question is that, suppose for such as any senior citizen or very senior citizen, what benefit, let's say benefit, what concessions are we can this claim?
With respect to what, sir?
Sir, after such as suppose any senior person is there or very senior person is there. So any concession or afterwards?
No, apart from the concessions which are there in respect to the tax rates. But then if you are asking, your question is the same as your predecessor have asked, that if the very senior citizens do have considerable amount of jewelry, and if it can be proved that they did have it in the year, say 2000 or 99 or 97, then I mean, to that extent, your jewelry will be treated to be explained. Now, how to prove that? I mean, one instance that if you're the very senior citizen has got it valued from a registered valuer, say in the year 1999, an item-wise valuation has been done, and those very jewelries are found in 2000, say 22. God forbids, I mean, there should not be any action. But then even if it is, say, foisted on you, then you would be in a position to demonstrate with the help of that evidence, sir, this report of a registered valuer, which was obtained in the year 1999, now showed the existence of this jewelry in 1999. And therefore, now it is beyond 10 years from today, because only 10 years, I mean, things can be questioned. So it is beyond 10 years, and therefore now you take it to have been acquired and be taken as explained. I think it would be sufficient at this now, I mean, as of now, and that too on this platform.
Sir, on jewelry again, so many times we remake the jewelry, it's not in its original form, what we have received 20 years back. And we haven't changed the declaration per se, like what we have received. So how do we account for that?
In that case, I believe, and I would suggest that if you have got jewelries altered, then there must be some expenses which must have been incurred. There must be some evidence of incurring that much of expenditure. I mean, then on that basis, then it can be proved, sir, the jewelry existing was the old one, which we got it made over. And here is some remaking charges, I mean, which we have incurred, I mean, through explained sources. And therefore, the jewelry in the present form now should be taken to be out from the old form.
Thank you.
Sir, I would like to ask one question. This is in continuation to the ladies being partners in a firm. Couldn't we just say that the ladies are sleeping partners and they don't know much about the actual running of the business?
Yes, yes. You know, if they are sleeping partners, is all right. But then on the other end, if it is being shown by that firm that she is working partner being paid remuneration, then there is a problem.
Okay. Okay.
But sleeping partner is all right.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
Sir, kindly unmute yourself, Ramesh, sir.
Yeah, can I come in?
Yes, sir, please.
Yeah, please, please.
Yeah. Hi, good afternoon to you, Dr. Saab.
Good afternoon.
Yeah. Dr. Saab, can you kindly enlighten a little more on the mismatch of stocks in business? You were discussing something on that. You were saying something on that.
Yes, I was saying that since stocks cannot be seized and cannot be taken away.
Yes.
And it will have to be left back at your disposal.
Okay.
Therefore, at the time of preparation of inventory by the tax officials, either in survey or in search, now the recording of quantity of that stock and the quality of that stock, that is very essential. If there is a difference in rate, that you can prove in any case, even at later stage. Suppose some rate which has been applied today now is wrong. Now, which you can demonstrate with the help of the contemporary evidences at any time later on. But then the quantity of that stock and the quality of that stock, that must be recorded correctly. And if there is some damage or some unsaleable part of that stock, that must be brought on record.
Okay,
That I was emphasizing, sir.
okay, okay. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Ashish, I have a question.
Yeah, please, Sanjay, go ahead.
Sir, if some asset has been gifted by the ancestor to us, like in the form of jewelry, but they have not valued it at that time. So do we need to do the revaluation now and then take it in our current asset in our books?
No, Sanjay ji, even if you will revalue it now that will not prove the year or the source of acquisition.
Yes.
So unless you are in a position to prove it by some evidence that it was acquired or it was given to you by your ancestors, by your grandparents or parents, say 19 years back or 12 years back, 13 years back, till that it will be treated to have been acquired the moment it is found by the tax department. So the year of acquisition, some evidence has to be there. And in that context, I said that if, now I appreciate, you can appreciate, now if there is some valuation done by your parents or grandparents, say 20 years back or 15 years back, and for that, if you have evidence from a registered valuer, that at least you would be in a position to say that apart from you and your parents, now there is one registered valuer also, he is saying that 15 years back he saw these assets.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else has a question? Okay. I think the question number was done, sir. So I have a little small question. So it will get a little technical, sir. My question was on peak balances.
Okay.
So when we are, when we have a search, supposing somebody is carrying on a business of money lending and has various inflows, outflows of money coming, debtors advance, debtors repayments, again, debtors advanced, cash drawn. So generally we adopt the concept of peak balance to declare as income. What is the implication on that, sir? How do we go? Whether 115BB will get attracted, or we can defend ourselves saying that this is the income in the what my cash is my stock. I want income reinvested in debtors. The repayment has come to me, again reinvest in debtors. So we can take that difference.
So if you are able to establish the peak balance and which is accepted, then that peak balance source would be in question. Okay.
Yeah.
So peak balance source since would not be there with you, therefore that is liable to be treated as income from undisclosed source, and thereby attracting 115 BBE stepped up tax rate. Okay. But then nowadays, after 2018, there are other implications of section 269 ST.
Yeah.
So there are implications of that, or there are implications of section 269 SS or section 269T in somebody else's hand. So these are the technical aspects.
But they're invoking ST. Nowadays they're invoking ST also on this.
Yes. So there is a problem in that.
So what's the solution, sir? Peak balance running off a current. What else we can? How do we safeguard their interest there?
That we'll discuss.
Okay, sir. We'll discuss offline. Okay, sir. I think we'll come to the conclusion. I think there are no more questions to be asked. आपने इतना विस्तार से इतना simple तरीके explain किया. I think now everybody is clarified.
I was today morning, Ashish ji. Now I just saw my book once again, which has recently been published, 7th edition. There I found that we have devoted one chapter on it as to how to face such.
Yes, I've seen that. I've read the article.
You have seen that, okay.
I've read your book, sir. I've read your book. A very, very nicely explained book and covers, the technical aspects, the simple aspects.
Because that was the personal experience which we have written.
Yeah. What a beautiful book. Treatise on that subject. I do follow it regularly. I keep reading it.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we come to the conclusion. We thank you once again. I would request Sanjay Bhatija, if you can kindly do the vote of thanks, please.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think we all started in good morning. It's become a very good afternoon now. Thank you, Rakesh ji, for the lovely 2 hours you have given us with the continuous insight
and have gripped our members, for over 120 members onto their seats. Thank you once again. Thank you, Ashish, Board of Sindhi Chamber of Commerce, and you members for at least obeying and staying quiet and keeping your videos off. Hope to see you soon in one more interesting session of a webinar or a face-to-face session. Have a nice Sunday. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gupta sir,
I would just say thank you very much for all the deep thoughts that we had, the apprehensions that we have. You have cleared today, most of them. Thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you, sir. I'm honored, sir. I'm honored. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. Thank you so much. It was really wonderful to have you with us and to interact with you. Very kind of you taking so much time for us and spending so much time explaining all the nuances of this complicated provision. Thank you once again. I don't have words to express my gratitude to you. I think he's offline.
He has left.
Yeah, he has left.